Hey everyone, this is David Brown with the migration update for April 19th, 2024 from the Braddock Bay Hawk Watch. Today ended up being an incredible day of hawk watching. This is my 14th season as a professional hawk counter, which means for the past 7 years I basically spend 180 days a year outside hawk watching, and I can easily say that what I witnessed today was the largest concentration of migrating raptors that I've ever seen. It was a day that held us in suspense going into it, and for the first few hours, was the big flight going to happen or not? Well, the big flight happened today, I can say that for sure. We ended up with more than 12,000 migrating raptors today, including a single hour with more than 11,000, including 10,500 broad-winged hawks in that single hour. And to put that in perspective, that's over 3,000 more raptors than we saw the entire month of March. Stay tuned as I take you through the journey of today and the emotions that went with it. Emotions of awe and exhilaration and excitement for those of us who were able to witness the spectacle, and perhaps emotions of regret and disappointment for those who weren't lucky enough to make it out. Kim and I started the day actually not here at the East Spit, but we made a brief stop at the Firehouse Woods so I could pick up winter wren and chipping sparrow for the season. But then we made it out here to the East Spit, and you can see that you cannot walk across from the East Spit onto the barrier island because of the water unless you were to wear muck boots. And we were a little bit concerned because the visibility wasn't great because there was some fog rolling in. Here we have a long-tailed duck that was actually swimming in that water that's over the sand bridge, so it's never good when one of the ducks that can dive the deepest and longest out of any bird in the world is swimming in an area that you want to be able to walk across. And this cute little American coot was puttering around on the lakeside. From the East Spit, we had 43 species. Next, we headed over to the Hawk Watch platform in Braddock Bay Park. And this was really a day of different stages of weather. So I'm going to take you through the day by dividing it up based on the weather. So from the start of the Hawk Watch at 9 until around 10:30 a.m., it was a gloomy day, overcast skies, and light to moderate southeasterly winds. And we were hoping that a flight would kick up ahead of some rain. We had a little bit of activity, but a big flight never really picked up. With the southerly winds, it seems like there was a decent amount of migration overnight and a good variety of birds around. Here we have a sparrow up in the tree that's dark gray on top. This is a dark-eyed junco. And here we have two birds that are yellow underneath with a black bib, very short tails, kind of a flat head onto a long beak, and a very stuttery way of flapping. These are eastern meadowlarks. Here we have a black bird with a light-colored eye, but we don't see the really long tail of a common grackle. Rather, this is a rusty black bird, and we had a decent number of rusty blackbirds migrating in flocks this morning. Here we have a hawk with a long tail and long wings with rounded tips, so we should be thinking accipiter. We see orange barring underneath, indicating adult, and we see a large head. This looks like the local adult Cooper's hawk. Here we have a flock of 4 ducks. On the males, we see a distinct helmeted look to the head, and on the female, we see a lot of white around the eye. These are wood ducks. And here we have a large white bird flying over the water, very pointed wings with some black underneath on the wingtips. We see a black cap and a large orangish red bill. This is a Caspian tern. The next stage of the weather for the day was rain that moved in around 10:30 a.m., and it actually ended up moving through quicker than we expected, and by around 11:30 the rain was finishing up, and the flight didn't really start to pick up until around noon. And that next period from around noon to 2 p.m., it was starting to clear up a little bit, just wasn't as gloomy, it was getting a little brighter, and we were starting to see more hawks starting to migrate. Especially, we first had a large number of sharp-shinned hawks begin to migrate, and then we started seeing small kettles of broad-winged hawks. Here we have a large gray and tan bird with long trailing legs and a long straight neck with a red cap and a long bill. This is a Sandhill crane. Here we have a small hawk in a glide posture. From the overall shape with somewhat broad wings and a medium-length tail, we should be thinking the Buteo genus. We see that the bird has a very straight trailing edge to the wing, and the wingtips look somewhat pointed. We also see that it has brown barring underneath and a black tail with a white band on it. This is an adult broad-winged hawk. And here we have another adult broad-winged hawk in a soar posture this time. So you can see even when they soar and spread those wings and tail out, that the wingtips look somewhat pointed. The wingtips are only made up of 4 feathers, 1, 2, 3, 4, compared to red shoulders and red tails where they're made up of 5 feathers, giving the wingtips a more rounded or squared off appearance. So the broad wings just look a little more pointy in the wingtips. And again, we can see that wide white band to the tail. When they fan their tails out, you can also make out some smaller white bands. When you see them from a close distance, from farther away, you would only see the single white band to the tail. Here we have a large dark raptor with a large head, and we see a lot of white underneath, especially in this wing pit area. This is an immature bald eagle. Here we have a large water bird migrating overhead. We see very thin pointed wings. We see some feet trailing behind, and we see a dark head with a pointed bill. This is a common loon in breeding plumage migrating north. Here we see a hawk with a long tail and long wings that are rounded at the tip, so we should be thinking accipiter. We see orange barring underneath, so we know it's an adult. And we see a relatively small head and a squared off tail because all of the tail feathers are the same length. This is an adult sharp-shinned hawk. We kept seeing flocks of 30 to 50 of some kind of small songbird. They didn't look quite right for horned larks, which we see in those kind of flocks earlier in the season. And finally, we had a flock come close enough to identify. And taking a close look, we see a forked tail and the distinctive facial pattern of purple finches. Here's another nice close look at an accipiter, and again we see a small head and a very squared off tail because all the tail feathers are the same length. This is another adult sharp-shinned hawk, and we had some great looks at sharpies throughout the day, and we had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sharp-shins for the day. So a really fun day to be out and see this small species of hawk. And here's an example of an adult sharp-shinned hawk in a soar. You can see that it spread its tail out, trying to get more surface area for lift. Again, notice that really small head, and note that the wings look a little bit rounded. To me, Sharpies just look a little bit more compact. They don't look big and lanky like the Cooper's hawks do. Here we have a somewhat large raptor with pointed wings. We should be thinking large falcon. We see blue barring underneath and a distinctive head pattern. This is an adult peregrine falcon, the fastest animal on the planet. Here we have a hawk that looks like a flying cross. We see that really long tail, and we see long wings with rounded wingtips. But on this bird, we see a large head, and we can see that the outer tail feathers, which fold onto the bottom, are slightly shorter. So we have a bit of a stair-step pattern to the tail. This is a Cooper's hawk. Here we have another adult sharp-shinned hawk. We see that really squared off tail and smaller head. And we see that it has a full crop, which is this bulge here, meaning that it has eaten recently. And a lot of the hawks that we saw today had full crops, and I think that they must have taken the opportunity to hunt while we had that rain this morning. And as we got close to 2 o'clock, it was continuing to brighten up, and a really good sharp-shinned hawk flight had picked up, and we were starting to see larger and larger kettles of broadwings, mostly in towards the parkway. But as we got into that 2 to 3 p.m. hour, the wind was shifting more around to the south and then around to the southwest. We had a little bit of blue sky come out, and we had a huge raptor flight. And it's hard to even put into words how big of a concentration of hawks this was. For about 45 minutes during that period, it was just total mayhem with hawks filling the sky from the lake over to the parkway. Everywhere you looked was just huge kettles of broad-winged hawks with other species mixed in. I was very busy trying to count hawks, so I only got a few photos that I hope somewhat represent what we were seeing, and Kim was able to get some cell phone videos that I'll include here as well. But this is just a tiny portion of what was filling the entire sky, just kettle after kettle of broad-winged hawks, by the hundreds and by the thousands. Everywhere you looked, the sky was filled with hawks, and it was just completely unbelievable, and it was exactly what we were hoping for. We knew that the weather was going to be hit or miss today, and when the birds found the opportunity to move, they went, and they went in big numbers. Between 2 and 3 p.m., we had around 10,500 broad-winged hawks migrate past and more than 11,000 total raptors for the hour. And you may be wondering, how do you even count so many hawks? Well, in most cases, I'm able to count all of the hawks by myself, but when you get a flight of that magnitude, it's too much for one person to accurately count. So we divided up the sky. I was watching the main flight line, which was over towards the lake, and I had other helpers, 3 other people actually. 2 of them were keeping an eye on other broad-winged hawk flight lines and also calling out other species that they were seeing mixed in. And we had one person who was dedicated to counting sharp-shinned hawks, which was a huge help because I would have only seen a tiny fraction of the sharp-shinned hawks that were moving during that period. And basically what you do is you find a line of migrating broadwings and you kind of focus on it. And the secret is you don't want to count them while they're circling and gaining altitude. You wait until they're gliding off. Now, that's easier said than done, especially sometimes you have ones you've already counted, then they start to circle again and they circle back and there's new ones gliding in. So sometimes it becomes total chaos and you just have to do the best that you can. For a flight of this magnitude, also, you usually use a hand clicker, and usually instead of counting by ones individually, you're counting by tens, either estimating by tens or just counting by tens in your head and doing one click for every 10. It just keeps you from having to wear out your thumb from clicking so much. And you may be wondering, what was it about that 1 hour that led to such a big concentration of hawks? And basically, it was a combination of a couple factors. So first of all, we are right at the peak of the broad-winged hawk migration for the adults, which come through first. Over the next few weeks, we'll start to get the juveniles, and they also come through in good numbers throughout May. But the adults want to get up on the nesting grounds, so they're trying to get up north as fast as they can. We had seen that 2 days ago that in Erie, Pennsylvania, they had counted over 20,000 broad-winged hawks. So we figured it would take them around 2 days to get to us. So we had probably the biggest concentration of the whole season of broad-winged hawks that were in the region and ready to move. And then today, with the way that the fronts played out, the weather was gloomy in the morning, then we had the rain, and then we had a period where the winds were favorable and it was clearing up enough to give them lift. And that was ahead of a cold front that was pushing in. And that's often when we get the biggest flights, are ahead of a cold front like that. So they're kind of riding the winds ahead of the cold front. They had enough sunshine and enough warmth to get lift and circle on kettles. So the hawks took the opportunity and the free ride. You can see when they're up, they're just soaring up to gain altitude and gliding. They're using very little energy. So they took advantage of the favorable conditions and they moved in huge numbers. And another thing that helped us out was that the flight all occurred within 1 hour. So sometimes you'll get a really big flight, but if it starts at, let's say, 1:45, then you'd get the bird split between 1 hour, then you'd put that data in, and then the rest would come in the next hour. But today, the flight picked up right at the beginning of the new hour and continued for most of that hour. So we got the biggest concentration all occurred within 1 clock hour. So that led to just a huge total for 1 hour rather than being split over 2 hours. And there's a lot of emotion associated with a flight like this. I think as it's happening, we're all aware that this is probably the 1 hour of the whole season or the entire year, or maybe within the next couple years, that we're going to experience a hawk flight this big. So there's a certain excitement of just witnessing it and wanting to take it in every moment. Now, for me personally, I'm responsible for counting them, and I also dragged other people into that responsibility. So that takes a little bit away from the ability just to look around and sort of absorb the whole experience. And really, with as busy as the flight was, there wasn't really any time for me to stop and think or appreciate anything. It's just, scanning around, finding my flight line I need to be counting and doing my best to count it, trying to get an accurate total. And in a lot of ways, it reminded me of the emotions of experiencing the total solar eclipse a few weeks ago, where you have a group of people who are together and sharing a common experience that's a very unique thing that only happens once in a very long time. So it's a lot of fun, and it's something special to be a part of. And I think in the future, we can all look back and we'll remember who was there and who we got to experience this big flight with. And there's also the emotions of knowing that there were certain people on the platform earlier in the morning who had left and might be missing it, or other people who were stuck at work, or people from out of the area who were planning to visit at some point. And I know there's people coming up to visit this weekend and knowing that they're going to be disappointed that they missed such a big flight of broadwings today. So a lot of different emotions go into a big hawk flight like this, but it was just something truly amazing to be able to be a part of it. And in addition to more than 10,000 broad-winged hawks in that 1 hour, we also had over 400 sharp-shinned hawks and around 250 turkey vultures and good numbers of many other species as well. So it was a really big mixed flight, and we did the best we could to pick out the other species from it, but it's a little overwhelming when all of the hawks come at once like that, and you do the best you can and you enjoy the experience, and you don't worry too much about what you could have done differently. It's such a fluke event that happens maybe once every couple of years. You do the best you can and you just enjoy the ride. And towards the end of the big flight, we had these 5 sandhill cranes come right overhead, kind of like a flyover at a sporting event. Here we have some happy hawk watchers smiling after witnessing a huge broad-winged hawk flight. We have me and Kim and Mike, and they were both big helps in helping to count the flight today. So thank you to both of them, and also to Nick, who was also the person who was counting all the sharp-shinned hawks. And there were many other people on the platform who were helping to call out birds as well. So it's a team effort when the flight is that big. I mean, it's always a team effort, but especially when there's an overwhelming number of hawks that I could never count just by myself. And by 3 o'clock, the big flight was pretty much done. The cold front hit, the wind shifted more westerly and became stronger, and that was that. All of the birds were riding that gust of wind ahead of the front, so when the front hit, things really slowed down for the next few hours. We were still seeing some birds, but it was pretty gloomy for a couple hours, and I thought about leaving, but actually it started to clear up, so I ended up staying until 7 p.m. and it really turned into a nice late afternoon into evening, a lot of blue sky and puffy clouds, and we had some birds get up and continue migrating all the way until around 7 o'clock. And taking a look at the eBird list for the Hawk Watch, today we had 82 species, which is a great species count for this time of year. I had 3 new species for the season today, which were winter wren, chipping sparrow, and I finally got my yellow-rumped warbler as a flyover at the Hawk Watch. And taking a look at the hawk count report for our migrant raptor totals, are you ready for this? Today we had 432 turkey vultures, 14 ospreys, 33 bald eagles, 49 northern harriers. For accipiters, we had 783 sharp-shinned hawks and 10 Cooper's hawks. For buteos, we had 2 red-shouldered hawks, 10,901 broad-winged hawks, 26 red-tailed hawks. And for falcons, we had 38 American kestrels, 3 merlins, and 1 peregrine falcon, for a grand total of 12,292 migrating raptors. That brings the April total to 31,277, and the season total to 39,397. Taking a look at the forecast for tomorrow, they're calling for partly cloudy in the morning, then becoming cloudy and windy later on, high in the upper 40s, and winds west at 20 to 30 miles per hour. So they've increased the wind speed a little bit. That's a little bit stronger than I prefer. I bet birds will still be on the move, although not in the huge numbers like we saw today, but just when the winds get that strong, you get blown around a bit on the platform. So hopefully we'll get a decent flight in the morning when there's a little more sunshine and the winds aren't quite as strong. But as it gets more into the afternoon and those winds increase, we might have to shelter behind the platform. For Sunday, they're calling for a mix of sun and clouds with a high around 50 and winds west at 15 to 25 miles per hour. Again, a little bit on the strong side, but there should still be a moderate amount of birds migrating. And for Monday, they're calling for mainly sunny skies with a high in the upper 40s and light northwesterly winds. I would expect light to moderate migration. And let me end with one more story. There's an older gentleman that sometimes comes to the Hawk Watch, and real nice and friendly guy, but he only comes out once, maybe twice a season. And a couple years ago, he came towards the end of May, and that was the day that we had a great look at a Mississippi kite. Well, today he showed up for the first time this season, and he came right at 2 o'clock and left right at 3 o'clock. So he was there for the magic hour. So I think he's seen more birds per hour than anyone else in the history of hawk watching, just from coming to the hawk watch right at the perfect time. And I think that's not a coincidence. I think he's been watching birds for a long time, and he understands that this was the chance for a big flight, and he came and he saw it. And but it made me laugh that people spend so many hours up at the hawk watch and never get the birds they want, and some people just waltz in and get all the birds and then leave. All right, well, I hope that I said everything that needed to be said about today. I know when you have these big hawk flights, it's always important to sort of document them for posterity. So whether it's in the hawk count report or for me through these YouTube videos, I always try to do my best to represent how the day was and just create something that we can look back at in the future to understand the weather conditions of the day and how the flight played out, and also the human side of the experience. So hopefully I did a good job covering that in this video. And if you missed the big flight today, know that there's still a lot of birds to come over the next month and a half as we finish up the Braddock Bay Hawk Watch at the end of May. So a lot of songbirds to come, a lot of raptors yet to come. Again, we're just in the adult broad-winged hawks. We still have all of the juveniles to come later on. So we still have tens and tens of thousands of birds that are going to pass through Braddock Bay. So I hope you're able to make it out next time we have a big flight at the Braddock Bay Hawk Watch. From Lyco Birds, this is David Brown. Thanks for watching.